Why knowledge matters.
But it also makes you an extremely nice conversionist to some extent, because I imagine, and just tell me how it is when I have a conversation with you, let's say in person, which is very different than online, right? And I think when you have this ability, especially if you develop this ability of asking good questions, whether there are such good or bad questions, and actually you also talk about this specifically in the book. But tell me a little bit how you usually converse with people, and how you really find like a good attunement to the other person, that you have somehow a fruitful discussion. So tell me a little bit your strategy, because I'm sure that you are extremely skilled in that. So walk us a little bit through about your reasoning and how you go into, and also how this book actually informs it, because you give very specific, very tangible strategies, especially also for teachers, how to actually frame questions, to make it personalizable for the students, right? And not just we, but also specific to yourself. So give us a little bit of taste about how you conduct, let's say with your very best friend, a
Y-
beautiful conversation, and how
Okay.
this book actually, Inquiring Minds, applies to that.
I'm going to say this, yeah, and I'm going to paraphrase John Hattie as I always do. Everything works, but everything doesn't work for everybody. Okay. I have specific things I do in terms of not only my professional, my personal conversations. Okay. That was questioning. Now, does it work with everybody? No, it really depends upon the person. One of my big things that I say, what do you mean? And every time you give me an answer, I say, what do you mean? Now, some people see that as what I intended to be, which is the engagement of a conversation or the request for an explanation. Some people say they're offended. They get bothered. Again, it's the type of personality you're dealing with. Like if I said to you, who's the first president of the United States? Most people say George Washington. And I say, what do you mean? That kind of puts them off sometimes. All right. Or if somebody wants to, it's really interesting how I also use it because sometimes people try to challenge you, unfortunately, and try to make you look bad or try to make you look like a fool, you're a fool, and they're smarter than you. So I'll say to them, they'll make a comment and say, what do you mean? And it's really funny because some people go, well, what do you mean? What do I mean? And I go, exactly. What do you mean? I'd like to know what are you saying here? What are you meaning here? Or there's actually times now when I do trainings where people will say, and I'll talk about something and they'll go, what do you mean? Or I'll ask them a question and I'll go, what do you mean? And I'll go, the Padawan has become the Jedi. Awesome. Now you got it. Okay. But Yannick, there's also a thing where, and this is another thing I take a lot, and it's actually I'm writing about this in my next book because I'm working on my next book right now. I really have taken to the concept of rethinking. And this was something that was introduced to me in the book Think Again by Adam Grant. And the whole concept of rethinking is that basically there's new data and information and changing circumstances and conditions that cause and compel us to rethink. Now, in our everyday, that's very easy. If we want to rethink our wardrobe, we'll do that. If we want to rethink renovating our house or renovating, or getting a new car or upgrading our technology, we'll rethink about why we do, how we do what we do. But when it comes to our knowledge, understanding, and feelings, we struggle because we find comfort in our convictions. We accept our knowledge and understanding as truth. Our ideas become ideology. In fact, that's one of the things Einstein felt very resentful about and very concerned about because he became the thing he stood against, which was when science becomes ideology and not a questioning of ideas. Now people are like, oh, I agree with Einstein or I am a part of the Einstein camp. That limits and that basically limits our learning. So again, with that rethinking, I've listened to some people who've said to me, I don't like, what do you mean? And some people will say, can I say, how do you know? And I don't like that because now it doesn't sound like to me I'm having a conversation. Now it sounds like to me like I'm challenging you. I'm throwing down the gauntlet. I'm confronting you or tell me more. But at the same time, I can't just say you're wrong. because they're not. I think they're wrong, but wrong is part of a thought concept. I didn't think we were going to get that deep of conversation. So one of the things I'm doing right now, and I'm really trying to push is with the concept of rethinking, is from more of a positive aspect to say, you're right, but why? So if I asked you, what is 2 plus 2, you would say to me,
4.
you're right, but why? And that why is what's really essential. It's not that you know 2 plus 2 equals 4. You can do that on your calculator. You can Google it. ChatGPT can even tell you about it. Can you explain to me how addition can be used to find the sum of two numbers such as 2 plus 2? That's the transferable learning. Now, what if you're not correct? Okay. Or what if you may be wrong? Okay, how do I do that without me saying to you, doing the Alex Trebek where I used to call where I go, ooh, I'm sorry, you know. So now what I'm doing, I'm quoting Billy Joel. You may be wrong, but you may be right, but why? So that's the whole thing, is that basically how we communicate. So that's two strategies. So whenever a child gives you an answer, ask, what do you mean? If you feel that might be um, not go over as well in your class, then say, you're right, but why? Or if they're incorrect, how about this? Or they're wrong. Okay, you may be wrong, but you may be right, but why? So quoting Billy Joel. So that's another technique that I actually came up with. It's not in the book. So again, but that's that rethinking, Yannick. I mean, when you read my book, Inquiring Minds Want to Learn, what I wrote in there is a snapshot of my thinking at that time, but that's not Canaan law of education. That's not, shouldn't be taken as this. There's always new things to think about. The reason why I wrote Inquiring Minds Want to Learn is because you see, now that's a good question over my shoulder. That was my first book, and was about the different types of questions we can ask and talk about how to create them. I wrote that in 2016, and I'm very grateful that it still works for people. People still enjoy it, but that was over 8 years ago. There's new data and information about questioning and inquiry, how we use questions. And 8 years ago, we didn't have a pandemic. 8 years ago, the world did not have Chat GPT that could explain to us the answers. So that's why I wrote this book as more of an updated, to say this is it and moving forward. And one of the things I try to do with my book is I try to say, all my books, is that this is not a snapshot in time. This is not, this works today, but tomorrow it won't work, and then we'll find it on the half price bookshelf because it's outdated. I try to make the ideas timeless with it. So again, what I'm hopefully not only doing is giving you some credible techniques, but also showing you the mindset of learning with questioning and inquiry. It involves asking people to rethink the data information. It's asking them to rethink and reflect on or review the circumstances and conditions, and asking them to reconsider, based upon that, why we do, how we do, what we do. It's not about answering, it's about addressing. So when I ask you a question, I don't expect you to answer, but this is what we're going to address. To get you to communicate, to delve deeper, to get you to go further, I will ask, what do you mean? I am now asking, you're right, but why? Or you may be wrong, you may be right, but why? And when I'm lecturing, and I just did this in Singapore, instead of me telling you, because right now I'm talking a lot, and Yannick, as much as it's deep, people get tuned out if we talk too much, and if we lecture, and if we pontificate, and if we sermonize. But one of the techniques, and I do this in my instructional delivery, is I say, what if I told you? And then I share with them the information I would have lectured. So I did this in Singapore, which was really fascinating, because a lot of times in Singapore, questioning inquiry is still very directive and instructional from a generalized standpoint. We want to teach and learn with questions and use questioning. You teach and learn through what I say is teach and learn through inquiry by questioning with good questions. So that requires changing your instructional delivery. So instead of me saying the Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared equals c squared because it's half a square, I would say, what if I told you the Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared equals c squared because it's the algorithm formula that describes half a square? You see how I'm inviting you into the conversation? Instead of telling you, Edgar Allan Poe created an entire genre of literary fiction by writing the first detective story featuring a sleuth who used deductive logic and reasoning to solve a crime. Okay, great. Probably tuned me out after the first few words, after I said Edgar Allan Poe or first detective mystery story or first genre of literature. But if I said, what if I told you that Edgar Allan Poe created an entire genre of literary fiction? Now I'm inviting you in. Now I'm drawing in. What if I told you he was the first to ever write a detective mystery story featuring a sleuth or a detective who used deductive logic and reasoning to solve a crime? Who does that sound like? Most kids would say Sherlock Holmes. Well, what if I told you that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle actually admitted that he based Sherlock Holmes on a character Edgar Allan Poe created 60 years before, named C. Auguste Dupin, in the short story Murders in the Rue Morgue? What if I told you that's not in your textbook? But what if I told you we're going to read it? See how I got you now? Okay. That's the whole thing about questioning. What did you learn? A lot. What did I teach you? Absolutely nothing. I just asked a question. But part of learning is not just demonstrating your learning, it's comprehending, communicating, and considering. So that's what I'm having you do. So that's the important thing about questions. So again, quick strategies. Anytime a child gives you the answer, you ask, what do you mean? If I feel uncomfortable with that, use this. Hey, you're right, but why? Or if they're incorrect or wrong, all right, you may be wrong, but you may be right, but why? Okay. And then instead of lecturing, say, what if I told you? And give them the information. And then you have the kids talk amongst themselves and you walk the room and you listen. And once they're starting the conversation start to trail off, you bring it back with a countdown of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And you ask them, what is something someone told you? Because now they have to summarize it.
That's why knowledge matters. Make your life a masterpiece. Visit now programs.d-ykm.com.